Jacob Davis and Melissa Carter Davis were what most people considered the ideal couple. Their love story had begun in college, where Jacob was studying business and Melissa was training to become a teacher. Their connection was instant, almost cinematic, and over the years, their bond seemed to grow stronger with each challenge life threw at them. They got married in a beautiful church ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, and settled down in a quiet suburb in Marietta, Georgia. Jacob quickly rose in his career as a real estate broker, while Melissa found her calling teaching at a local elementary school. Together they built a comfortable life filled with weekend barbecues, summer road trips, and community involvement. To the outside world, their lives seemed flawless. Neighbors often commented on how polite and well put together they were. Melissa was the kind of woman who baked cookies for new neighbors and organized book drives for her students. Jacob was charismatic, always ready to lend a hand or flash a charming smile. They hosted dinner parties, attended charity events, and were active in their church. People admired them, envied them. But like many seemingly perfect stories, there were truths hidden just beneath the surface. Truths that would only begin to unravel after tragedy struck. Over the last year of her life, Melissa's behavior began to subtly shift. She became quieter, less engaged, and often looked tired, even sad. Her colleagues at the school noticed her declining energy and pale complexion. She stopped joining them for lunch and rarely stayed for faculty meetings. When asked, she'd brush it off, blaming stress or seasonal illness. But those close to her knew something was wrong. One person who noticed more than anyone else was her younger sister, Emily Carter. Emily was 10 years younger than Melissa, still in her 20s, lively, outgoing, and full of ambition. She lived in the city but visited frequently, saying she enjoyed the quiet of her sister's home. What began as occasional visits turned into longer stays. She'd spend weekends at the Davis home, then entire weeks. Eventually, it wasn't unusual for her to stay over even when Melissa wasn't feeling well enough to host. To friends and family, Emily's presence was comforting. It seemed like a sister stepping in to help during a tough time. She cooked, cleaned, and even offered to drive Melissa to appointments. Jacob appeared appreciative of her help, often praising her maturity and devotion. But some neighbors began to feel uncomfortable. They noticed Emily and Jacob laughing together more often than seemed appropriate. They noticed lingering glances, subtle gestures that hinted at something more than shared concern for Melissa's health. Still, no one said anything out loud. Who were they to judge? Then, everything changed on a stormy Tuesday morning in March. The Kabish weather had been unusually harsh, with thunder and pouring rain blanketing the small town. At 7:46 a.m., Jacob made a panicked call to 911, reporting that he had found his wife unresponsive in the bathtub. First responders arrived quickly. The scene was quiet. Too quiet. Melissa lay in the water, fully clothed, her eyes closed, lips slightly blue. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries. The initial assumption was a tragic accident. Perhaps she fainted, hit her head, and drowned. The autopsy ruled the cause of death as accidental drowning. Toxicology reports showed trace amounts of over-the-counter sleep aids, which investigators considered non-suspicious. Her death certificate was signed. Her body was prepared for burial. The entire process moved swiftly, almost too swiftly, some thought. Within 3 days, a memorial service was held. Friends, co-workers, and family members filled the small chapel, grieving the sudden loss of a woman known for her gentle spirit and warm heart. Jacob delivered a short eulogy, his voice cracking as he thanked everyone for coming. He mentioned how Melissa had been his rock, how empty the house now felt without her. Emily sat in the front row, dressed in black, tears streaming down her face. She clutched a tissue, her head bowed, her grief seemingly genuine. After the service, people offered condolences, dropping off casseroles and cards at Jacob's doorstep. For a while, it seemed like things would slowly return to normal. But just 2 days after the burial, everything took a disturbing turn. It was a hotel clerk who first raised the alarm. She recognized Jacob as soon as he walked into the lobby of the small inn on the outskirts of town. He wasn't wearing black, or looking particularly broken, just a ball cap pulled low over his eyes and casual clothing. He walked up to the desk and checked in. The woman behind the counter thought it was strange that someone who had just lost his wife would be staying at a hotel so soon, but what she saw next shook her to the core. Less than 30 minutes later, a young woman arrived. She wore a hoodie, kept her head down, and barely spoke as she made her way to the same room Jacob had just entered. But the clerk knew exactly who she was: Emily Carter, Melissa's younger sister. It wasn't just inappropriate, it felt wrong. The hotel clerk said nothing at first, unsure of what she'd witnessed. But the next day, she confided in a friend who passed the story along to someone in town. And just like that, rumors erupted like wildfire. The community was stunned. How could Jacob be seen in a hotel room with his wife's sister so soon after her funeral? Grief is complicated, some argued. People mourn in strange ways, but others weren't so forgiving. It felt like a betrayal of Melissa's memory, of the sanctity of marriage, of basic decency. And then Emily disappeared. She stopped replying to messages. Her social media accounts were deleted. She left her apartment in the city without a word. Jacob, when asked about it, claimed she was devastated and needed time alone. But no one was buying it. Melissa's brother, Thomas, began asking questions. He had never liked Jacob. There had always been something slick, something calculated about him. Now he couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa's death hadn't been what it seemed. He remembered his sister's final phone call. She had sounded tired, nervous. She mentioned being scared but wouldn't say why. He thought of the hotel. He thought of Emily vanishing. And for the first time, he began to wonder. Had Melissa known what was happening behind her back? Had she discovered something she was never meant to find out? The perfect couple had become the center of a chilling mystery. A woman was dead, her husband was under quiet suspicion, and her sister had disappeared from the face of the earth. The storm that began with a bathtub accident was only just beginning, and beneath the calm exterior of suburban life, a dark and twisted secret was waiting to be uncovered. The whispers began slowly, creeping through the town like a quiet infection. At first, people tried to dismiss them, just gossip, the natural stirrings of a curious community processing a sudden and tragic death. But the murmurs grew louder after the story about the hotel surfaced. What had once been admiration for Jacob and sympathy for his loss quickly transformed into suspicion and quiet disgust. It wasn't just that he had been seen at a hotel. It was who he had been with that disturbed everyone the most. Emily Carter, Melissa's own sister, seen 2 days after the funeral with the grieving widower. The image alone painted a picture most people didn't want to believe, but couldn't ignore. Melissa had been beloved. She wasn't just a teacher or a neighbor, she had left an imprint on nearly everyone she encountered. Parents from the school dropped off flowers at her home, even weeks after the funeral. Her students drew cards, trying to process the loss of the woman who once read them bedtime stories in class. In the midst of this outpouring of love, Jacob's behavior didn't sit well. He stopped answering calls. He didn't return to church. He closed the blinds at his house and rarely left except for groceries. When he was seen in public, he kept his head down, moving quickly. The friendly social man people once knew had vanished, replaced by someone almost unrecognizable. But what truly began to shift the public opinion wasn't the whispers about the hotel. It was a voicemail. Karen, Melissa's best friend since college, had saved it without really knowing why. It had arrived just 2 weeks before Melissa died. In the message, Melissa's voice was low and tense. She said she didn't feel safe, that she thought someone was watching her. She didn't give names or details, and the message ended abruptly, almost as if she had been interrupted. Karen had listened to it several times after Melissa passed, but had assumed it was just anxiety. Now, with everything happening, the message took on a new and disturbing meaning. Karen brought the voicemail to Thomas, Melissa's brother. Thomas had already been deeply unsettled by the events following his sister's death. He had always been wary of Jacob. Something about his charm seemed rehearsed, too polished. Thomas had never said it out loud while Melissa was alive, but he had often wondered if Jacob was hiding something. Now, with the voicemail and the hotel sighting, he became certain that Melissa had sensed danger in the days leading up to her death. Emily's sudden disappearance added a layer of complexity to the unfolding story. No one had seen or heard from her since the night she was spotted at the hotel. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was found locked and dark. Mail began piling up at the door. Friends said she had recently quit her job, citing personal reasons. No one knew where she had gone, and it appeared she had left in a hurry. The police were notified, and while they initially saw no reason to investigate Melissa's death further, they could no longer ignore the growing pressure. The community was restless. Karen handed over the voicemail. Thomas gave them a list of inconsistencies he had noticed in Jacob's behavior. The hotel clerk, though nervous, agreed to give a statement about what she saw. Still, the case was complicated. Melissa's death had been ruled accidental. There was no visible trauma, and the initial toxicology report had shown nothing out of the ordinary, only low levels of a common sleep aid. But the police decided to quietly reopen the case. A new set of detectives were assigned to review the original autopsy, the timeline of events, and all the information that had surfaced since the funeral. They began by reviewing phone records, financial statements, and security camera footage from around the time of Melissa's death. Slowly, a picture began to form, one that suggested more than just a grieving husband and a heartbroken sister. Jacob had been behaving strangely even before Melissa's death. He had withdrawn large sums of money from a joint account. He had made calls to unknown numbers in the middle of the night. There were also strange patterns in his movements. On several occasions, his phone had pinged in areas far from his usual route, places with no clear reason for him to be visiting. When asked about these details, Jacob offered vague explanations. He said he had been running errands, visiting clients, clearing his head. The detectives interviewed people from Jacob's professional circle. A few colleagues hinted that he had been acting stressed, unusually aggressive, and distracted. One even recalled overhearing a heated conversation on the phone where Jacob was yelling about not waiting any longer. No one knew what it meant at the time. Now it sounded like a piece of a much darker puzzle. The investigation also turned toward Emily. Despite her absence, they tracked her financial activity. Her bank account showed several large deposits, one just days before Melissa's death. That deposit had come from one of Jacob's business accounts, a fact that immediately raised eyebrows. Why would Jacob transfer thousands of dollars to his sister-in-law shortly before his wife died? There was no clear explanation, and Jacob had no documented reason to be paying Emily anything. She hadn't been employed by him or his company. The transaction added weight to the theory that whatever was happening between Jacob and Emily had started long before Melissa's death. Neighbors were re-interviewed. One woman, who lived across the street, said she had once seen Emily leaving the Davis home late at night when Melissa was supposedly out of town. Another mentioned seeing Jacob and Emily at a cafe on a weekday afternoon, acting too comfortable to be just in-laws. All of this information painted a disturbing picture, one that suggested betrayal, secrecy, and possibly a calculated plan. But there were still no concrete answers. Melissa's death certificate remained unchanged. Jacob was not officially a suspect. Emily was not officially missing. It was all whispers, circumstantial evidence, and the gut feeling shared by nearly everyone who had loved Melissa. In the eyes of the law, it wasn't yet enough. But for Thomas, Karen, and many others, it was more than enough to suspect that something terrible had happened behind closed doors. Something Melissa had felt, but never fully escaped. The story was no longer about a grieving husband and a helpful sister. It was becoming a tangled web of lies, hidden motives, and a single unanswered question that haunted everyone involved. Had Melissa truly died by accident, or had her life been taken by the two people she trusted most? As the quiet investigation progressed behind the scenes, the weight of suspicion began to suffocate Jacob. Though he was not publicly named as a person of interest, the stares, the distance, and the silence from friends told him everything he needed to know. The once friendly community now regarded him with cold civility, treating him more like a stranger than a neighbor. Parents at the local school no longer waved. His phone, once full of messages of sympathy, now remained silent. Business clients pulled out of deals without explanation. The polite world around him was closing its doors, slowly and methodically. Meanwhile, investigators continued combing through Jacob and Melissa's life together. They requested access to Melissa's private emails and messages. Her phone had been turned over by her brother, and while most conversations were innocent exchanges with friends and co-workers, one particular message caught their attention. Sent a week before her death, it was addressed to a friend and hinted at an unsettling discovery. Melissa had written, "I think he's hiding something, and I'm not sure I'm the only one he's been confiding in lately." The message ended there. No names, no accusations. But it was enough to reopen the possibility that Melissa had known about an affair, or worse, suspected one, and had been preparing to act on it. Investigators also took a closer look at the insurance policies connected to Melissa's death. What they found raised even more concern. 2 months before she died, a new life insurance policy had been added to the existing one, naming Jacob as the sole beneficiary. The payout was significant, over $500,000. The the paperwork, had been signed electronically, and while the signatures matched, there were subtle signs that Melissa might not have fully understood what she was signing. According to her financial advisor, Melissa had once mentioned wanting to create a trust for future children, something that had never been pursued. The timing of the new policy coincided closely with Jacob's unexplained financial activity. Large, cash withdrawals and sudden deposits into an account that investigators later confirmed was tied to Emily. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the investigators still lacked hard evidence. A theory was forming. Jacob and Emily had developed a secret relationship, and as their desire to be together grew, so did their desperation. Melissa, in this theory, had become an obstacle, one they chose to remove. Still, motive was not proof. Breakthrough came unexpectedly. A forensic specialist reviewing Melissa's autopsy photos noticed something that hadn't been flagged during the original examination: a small bruise on the inside of her upper arm. It was faint, partially obscured by the water exposure and the condition of her skin post-mortem, but it suggested someone might have grabbed her. Combined with the trace amount of sleep aid in her system, a new possibility emerged. Melissa had been drugged, weakened, and held underwater. The official cause of death had been ruled as accidental drowning, but with this new evidence, the coroner agreed to amend the findings and update the cause of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. This small change was enough to reopen the case in full. As the case escalated, the search for Emily intensified. Investigators reached out to known associates, scoured surveillance footage from nearby towns, and flagged her passport and credit cards. Then, 3 weeks after the amended report, they got a hit. Emily had checked into a wellness retreat in North Carolina under a different name, Emma Clark. The retreat was a private facility known for confidentiality, often used by celebrities and high-profile clients seeking to disconnect. Authorities moved quickly, but quietly. When they arrived, Emily was found living in one of the cottages, pale, thinner than before, and clearly under stress. She didn't resist. She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and agreed to return with them. What followed was a 6-hour interview, one that would become the turning point in the case. Emily did not confess to murder. She did not claim to know how Melissa had died. But she did reveal something unexpected. According to her statement, she and Jacob had begun a romantic relationship nearly a year before Melissa's death. It had started innocently, she said, Jacob confiding in her about the pressures of his marriage, Melissa's emotional distance, and their fading intimacy. But things quickly escalated. They began meeting in hotels. Emily admitted she felt guilty, but had convinced herself that Jacob was miserable and that Melissa would eventually leave him. She claimed Jacob never spoke about harming Melissa. But in the weeks leading up to her sister's death, she noticed he had become obsessive, more controlling, more impatient. He talked about starting over, about wanting a fresh life without complications. When Melissa died, Emily said she panicked. She hadn't known what to think. She hadn't believed Jacob had anything to do with it until the night at the hotel, when he had handed her an envelope of cash and asked her to disappear for a while. That, she said, was when she realized something was terribly wrong. Emily's cooperation changed everything. Her statement didn't fully implicate Jacob in the crime, but it confirmed key details that supported the theory of a planned act. Investigators now had evidence of a financial motive, an ongoing affair, and behavior that suggested intent to cover up the truth. With the autopsy report revised and Emily's testimony, Authorities obtained a warrant to search Jacob's home and devices. What they found shocked even seasoned detectives. Hidden on Jacob's encrypted laptop were deleted documents including a checklist titled New Start. It listed steps such as finalize policy, handle apartment, secure funds, and exit plan for E. There was also a spreadsheet calculating insurance payouts, debts, and projected living costs for 2 people. Most damning, though, was a deleted message draft addressed to a lawyer asking about the legal risks of an unexpected death in the home. With mounting evidence, Jacob was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. The murder charge was still pending further forensic analysis, but the case was now firmly in the public spotlight. The community that had once admired Jacob now watched in disbelief as his double life unraveled on national news. Footage of his arrest played on every channel. News outlets dissected every moment of the investigation, every word of Emily's testimony, and every shred of evidence from their suburban nightmare. For Melissa's family, the arrest brought a complicated sense of closure. The truth was finally surfacing, but it came with an unbearable cost. They had lost her not to an accident, but to betrayal. A betrayal orchestrated by the 2 people she trusted most. Yet even with Jacob behind bars, questions remained. How much had Emily truly known? Was she a victim, a participant, or something in between? And most haunting of all, what exactly happened in that house on the night Melissa died? The answers would take time, but for the first time since her death, justice no longer felt like an impossible dream. It felt real. And it was just beginning. News of Jacob's arrest spread across the country, transforming the quiet town into the epicenter of a chilling true crime story. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, camera crews lined the sidewalks, and headlines screamed betrayal, greed, and murder. What had begun as an assumed tragedy, a young wife lost too soon, had unraveled into a tale far more sinister. Jacob's photo was everywhere now, no longer the charming husband, but the accused conspirator whose double life had stunned everyone who thought they knew him. Behind the scenes, prosecutors worked day and night to build their case. They had Emily's statement, the altered autopsy report, financial records, and digital evidence from Jacob's laptop. But what they lacked was definitive forensic proof that Melissa's death had been a homicide. Without that, Jacob could argue everything was circumstantial. Poor choices, yes, but not murder. Investigators needed something irrefutable, something physical, something undeniable. They turned their attention back to the night Melissa died. The scene had been ruled clean at the time. No signs of forced entry, no marks of struggle, nothing out of place. But now, with suspicion hanging over Jacob, they re-examined everything. They went back to the photographs, the water in the bathtub, the unwashed glass on the bathroom counter. A forensic specialist noticed something odd, a faint residue on the rim of the glass. When tested, it revealed traces of zolpidem, a powerful sedative, more than what Melissa's prescription should have allowed. Combined with the trace amounts found in her system, this pointed to the possibility that someone had dosed her far beyond her normal intake. Then came the second breakthrough. A neighbor, previously overlooked, came forward with security footage from a private camera mounted near her driveway. The footage was grainy and unfocused, but the timestamp matched the night of Melissa's death. At 11:47 p.m., a shadowy figure was seen leaving the Davis home through the side gate. The person moved quickly, wore a hooded sweatshirt, and was carrying something that looked like a small bag. The angle didn't capture a face, but the body, type and height appeared consistent with Jacob. It wasn't proof on its own, but when paired with everything else, it added a deeper layer to the puzzle. Jacob's defense team responded swiftly, calling the evidence speculative. They claimed Jacob had nothing to do with Melissa's death, and that he and Emily had only grown closer after the tragedy. They painted Emily as unstable, a woman plagued by guilt for betraying her sister. They questioned the motives behind her statement, suggesting she was manipulating the narrative to save herself. But privately, even the defense team knew they were losing ground. Meanwhile, Emily remained under protective watch. Though she hadn't been formally charged, authorities were cautious. Her story, though compelling, left gaps. Why hadn't she come forward earlier? Why take the money and run? What did she really know? Interrogators questioned her repeatedly, gently pressing for details about the days before Melissa's death. Each time Emily stuck to her version. She had believed Jacob when he told her Melissa had simply slipped and drowned. She had taken the money out of fear, not guilt. But her eyes betrayed something else, a heaviness, a secret she hadn't yet shared. Eventually, under pressure and isolation, Emily asked to speak to a different detective. She had something more to say. In a taped interview, Emily admitted that the night before Melissa's death, she and Jacob had fought. Jacob had grown increasingly erratic, angry that she wasn't ready to leave town with him. He told her Melissa was standing in the way of their future. Emily claimed she thought it was just talk, emotional venting. But then Jacob said something chilling. Tomorrow, everything changes. Emily had dismissed it at the time, chalking it up to frustration. But after Melissa's death, and especially after being paid to disappear, she realized that Jacob might have been planning something all along. When asked why she didn't warn anyone, Emily broke down. Shame, fear, guilt, they had paralyzed her. And by the time she understood the weight of Jacob's words, it was already too late. Her new testimony gave prosecutors what they needed. They issued a revised arrest warrant, this time charging Jacob with first-degree murder. The evidence, while still circumstantial in parts, had become a mountain. The motive was clear. Jacob stood to gain financially and emotionally from Melissa's death. He had planned to replace her with her own sister. The means were proven. Drugging her with a sedative and ensuring her unconscious body wouldn't resist the water. The opportunity was confirmed. He had been in the home, alone, with no alibi, and now footage placed him outside, sneaking away into the dark. The trial was scheduled for early spring. In the months leading up to it, the town lived under a cloud of unease. Families who had once shared dinners with the Davises now whispered about betrayal and justice. Melissa's school held a memorial garden ceremony in her honor. Her former students painted stones with her favorite quotes and laid them around a blooming tree. Her absence was deeply felt, and the wounds of her loss reopened with every news update about the case. At the pre-trial hearing, Jacob appeared thinner, his once confident demeanor replaced with nervous silence. He pleaded not guilty, maintaining that Melissa's death had been a terrible accident. But the courtroom was filled with people who didn't believe him, people who had once loved him, now staring at a man they barely recognized. The prosecution presented a concise version of the case. A man, bored and resentful, saw a way out and took it. A woman, his wife, trusted him, and it cost her everything. And another woman, her sister, got caught in the web of his manipulation. The defense fought back, insisting that grief had distorted the facts, that the investigation had been biased by public pressure and the media frenzy. But even the judge looked unconvinced. As the trial date approached, one final surprise surfaced. Hidden folder on Jacob's cloud backup, missed during the initial investigation, was discovered by a tech analyst. Inside were audio recordings, dozens of them, taken from a voice memo app on his phone. Most were harmless, notes about work, errands, reminders. But one, dated just a day before Melissa's death, chilled investigators to the core. In it, Jacob could be heard speaking softly, rehearsing. He said things like, "She wasn't careful," and "It was an accident. I tried to help, and I don't know what happened. She must have fallen." It was a script, an attempt to perfect the grieving husband role he intended to play. The audio ended with silence, then a breath, then a quiet, chilling sentence. "No more lies after this, just freedom." That recording was the final nail, VEO. Prosecution now had motive, means, opportunity, and intent, all from Jacob himself. The puzzle that had haunted a town was nearly complete. Melissa hadn't died in a tragic accident. She had been silenced by the man she loved in the home she trusted, and justice was finally catching up.